Having spoken to police technology leaders for the first half of this mini-series, I turn now to focus on fire. Preparing for this interview, I took a good look at fire and thought about how does technology work here? Is it just about the IT department, keeping the lights on with a bit of innovation on the side? No, it's not. It's so much more than that. The ecosystem of fire is rife with technology. Think about the fire station, the fire engines, the control room, the incident ground, the kit worn by firefighters, and the way they communicate with other services and the public at large. It's a rich environment, and while fire doesn't have the gigantic IT budgets that policing has, there's lots of innovative thinking going on. I'm Catherine Levin, editor of Emergency Services Times, and in this episode of For Every Response, I talk to Callum Faint. Callum is the Chief Fire Officer for Leicestershire Fire and Rescue Service. He also holds two national roles, one for digital technology and cyber, and the other for operational communications. For this short series of the pod, we are all about tech perspectives with our partners, the Emergency Tech Show and the Police Digital Service. You might wonder why I'm talking to a fire chief, but it will quickly become apparent. Callum's a background in the control room and deep curiosity and understanding about the potential for technology to improve fire and rescue services makes him the perfect guest for this fire-focused episode. I'll confess my love of fire and years working in the sector, so I was in my element talking to Callum and weaving questions in and around risk and the road towards the College of Fire. It's timely and relevant. We kick off this conversation by finding out why he came to take on these national roles, in addition to his busy job as a Chief Fire Officer.
So generally speaking, as you work your way through the ranks in the organisation, you become exposed to the National Fire Chiefs Council and the great work that they do in leading on a national perspective. I'd been a chief for a little while, and there's kind of a tangible benefit to holding a national portfolio to take your organisational work forward, but obviously delivering change at a national scale. I have quite a techie background. I'm interested in what technology can do. So those two portfolios really they overlap quite nicely. And very much earlier in my career, I was actually a fire control operator as well. So that's where the operational comms kind of passion came from. So it seemed a really good opportunity to take the sector forward in areas that I have an interest and some experience in. So I volunteered for those roles, and thankfully, after a brief selection process, was allowed to kind of take up those national portfolios.
I didn't realise you had a control room background. That's interesting. So were you a control room operator early in your career? Did you end up going through the management chain within control?
A bit of a unique case, more than happy to talk about it. I joined as a whole-time firefighter when I was 18, and about 3.5 years into my career, I ran into some medical difficulties. I was actually diagnosed with epilepsy. At the time, the laws were a little bit different, so I was effectively ill health retired from the operational side of the organisation, but again, had such a passion for fire and rescue services, I was able to join the control room as a control operator and served in there for just over 3 years. So as a fire control operator for the majority of that, and towards the end, I was crew manager level at the time. Thankfully, I was able to demonstrate my fitness after that and returned back into the operational side of the organisation. But it gave me a really good understanding and appreciation of just the difficult environment that a control room is, the challenging, different pressures, different stressors, but really, well, it is the tip of the spear, if I'm honest. It's where the emergency response starts, and such a critical role that's often overlooked or forgotten.
Yes, I often hear that control rooms are the forgotten part of the service. But as you say, that is, for most people, it's their first exposure to the emergency services. They're ringing 999, having the worst day of their lives, and here they are talking to you. So let's talk about the tech in the control room, and let's start with that. You mentioned MATE earlier to me, and I wonder if you look at a control room today compared with the control room that you started off with years ago, what do you think have been the major changes in terms of technology, and what improvement has it led to in terms of the service that the public gets?
There's a plethora of improvements that have been made. So even if you start before it reaches the control room, the upgrading of the BT network, the 999 system, that when I certainly was in a control room was very wire-based and traditional network servers, like hard wires rather than the digital service we find today, how those calls are routed through to the control room, the much more sophisticated telephony, the telephone systems, or ICS systems as they're called, ICCS. That really enables control operators to identify information a lot quicker where the calls originated from. A lot of that can be automated now through ISEC data, whereas before you literally had a phone number and you had to extract all of that information. So it's really kind of sped the response up so the control room operators can get a lot more information in automated ways. And then the sophistication around the mobilising system, looking at appliance availability a lot quicker, dynamic or live data of where the fire engines are, so you get the quickest fire engine to respond, not necessarily assumption on where it is at base, etc. So really, really quick. And then you can even add newer technology on, so whether it be Good SAM or geolocating services, so you can ping someone a text message, they can click on it and it will automatically give you the what 3 words location of where they are. That can really, particularly with more rural road traffic collisions or rural incidents where people may not necessarily know the road name or where they are, that can cut minutes off a phone call, and therefore you mobilise minutes quicker. And without being glib, seconds save lives in our environment. Imagine what minutes do. So it's almost a completely new generation of tech that's really speeding up call handling, mobilising, and then giving information to crews on the scene, whether it be en route or when they're there. So it's an entirely different environment, and one I think it's fair to say is continually evolving. I'm sure we'll come on to talk about AI assistance and where AI has a role to play in the sector, but it's going to be continually evolving, and our job is to kind of keep pace with that and hopefully steer and guide some of that development rather than just being the recipient of it.
That is quite a shopping list you've given me there of things that have changed in the periods that in between you starting control and now being chief. There's a lot of tech there, a lot of different things going on, but fundamentally it's about the humans, the control room operators. How do you think control room operators have been able to evolve their role so that they can stay on top of the technology, able to provide the service, but also manage their own well-being along the way because of demand and having to take on board all of those different systems that you've described to us? What have you seen in terms of the evolving role of a control room operator and the skill set that you're looking for, and how you keep them trained, developed, but also keep them, their well-being as well?
Yeah, a great question that's multifaceted. So at the root of it, the control room operator needs to be able to engage with people over the phone, obviously. But those people can be in varying degrees of mental state. As you've already mentioned earlier, this probably is the worst day of their life and they are looking for someone to help. And they can be emotionally compromised. They might have a relative in the building still, their pet may be in the building, whatever it may be. So the first and foremost skill of a control room operator is being able to engage with someone and extract information in them when they're in a very emotional state. It's relatively easy to engage with someone who's calm, composed, and know what's going on, but it's a very different skill set. So that human interaction is the primary thing that we need from control room operators. And obviously they need to then transpose that into the mobilising system. So you've also got to be able to multitask of talking to someone, calming them down, extracting information and transposing it at the same time. And then you also need your other operators potentially to be stepped back a little bit to look at where appliances are, almost have that strategic view of the organisation, moving resources around. And I think the important thing that we'll probably talk about quite a lot today is having that human in control of the decision making. The technology is great. It's always good at suggesting and providing solutions to you, but the human brain is far better than any computer. So you want to engage that human brain in the decision making process and being comfortable and confident enough to say, that doesn't feel right. I'm going to alter the fire engines we're sending for this reason. And as a chief, I need to empower my control room operators to do that and support them. So it's kind of a mixed blend, really. It's an incredibly challenging role. Mentally, it's incredibly fatiguing. Some of my hardest night shifts I've ever worked in my 32-year career were in the control room, and that was for very quiet periods and very busy periods. When it's incredibly busy, staying on track of where appliances are, availability, who's deployed where, it probably is one of the most cognitive and mentally fatiguing environments, which is where, as you mentioned, that the staff welfare is incredibly important. The control room operators I've often reported, and certainly what I found, you never really got to know what went on at an incident or how people did after the incident. that not knowing can be just as worse as knowing if there's a tragic outcome. So there's a really important thing around operational crews building a relationship with their control operator colleagues to really kind of help share the picture and evolve what went on. Certainly from my experience, if you're giving fire survival guidance, which is where you're on the phone with someone who's trapped in a building and you hold that line open and engage with that individual until crews get there, you really want to know what the crews did when they got there and how they affected a rescue. So it's a really important thing in completing that story, letting control operators know what went on, and also including them. We, within Leicestershire, do something called TRIM, which is Trauma Risk Incident Management. If you've been through a challenging incident, it's a bit of a debrief process, but it also helps share information around what went on around the rest of the incident. So we think it's really, really valuable to involve our control room operators, in the debrief, but also checking in on their mental well-being after a traumatic incident. And I'm sure, like every fire and rescue service, we have an array of different interventions, which is not one size fits all. That just doesn't work when you're looking at mental health and well-being. So we have an array of offerings that the individual can dip in and out of. Some are offered proactively, and some are there if someone wants to delve a little bit deeper to make sure they're okay and able to continue to do their great role.
It's interesting that you talked about human very clearly through that response. And before you started speaking, I'd written down human in the loop, which is the sort of phrase that's almost becoming a bit trite, I suppose, in some ways, that the AI phrase, human in the loop, but you use the human in the sense of just the humanity in the control room about being able to make those decisions. I'm interested in the use of video in the control room as a new way of bringing the incident into the control room. So using these people's phones or somewhere on the incident ground, being able to put video into the control room. Do you think that's a good thing to bring that technology in to create a sense of the control room knowing what's happening on the ground? But actually that could be quite overwhelming in itself. So where are fire rescue services when it comes to using video and control in terms of actually seeing what's happening at the incident and in terms of how they're operating through that process?
I think this one's a mixed bag. I think there are some really good positives to it, but I also think there are some significant risks to it. So if you're beaming or streaming a video live from the incident, that gives a degree of overall kind of understanding of the incident or a good operating picture. But our control room operators aren't incident commanders. So they're not trained to command incidents, to deploy resources on the ground. That they are purely the command and control mobilising aspect and overall. So there is some possibility if they start receiving images, they might get drawn to it and potentially try and make some decisions or even interpret it in a way that they're not necessarily trained to do so. So I'm not sure it adds great overview to the command and control room. Where I think it can add value is particularly if you've got commanders in the control room, whether it's an incident escalating, so a group manager or an area manager or whatever role it might be goes to the control room. I think that really does hold some value, that it can give some understanding of the scale and the size of the incident. They can start making some tactical or strategic decisions around organisational control. So I think it does have a place. I'm not yet convinced that it's positive across the board. The other risk to it is the tactical commander is remote from the incident, could start seeing the images and start trying to make on-scene decisions whilst they're remote. That has quite a lot of risks attached to it. So there does need to be some safeguards around it. But equally, if the public are seeing those images via news outlets and social media, etc., then why shouldn't those tactical and strategic managers be able to view those as well? So I think it's both good, but also holds some risks overall.
Yes, it's interesting to talk about that because I recently went to Manchester Fire Rescue Service where they have introduced body-worn video to officers and the ability for that camera footage to feed back into the control room. So it's already happening. Interesting. I mean, it's early days for them. So it's interesting to see how that evolves in the next sort of 12, 24 months, I think. Can we return back to the human in the loop thing? So in terms of AI, you mentioned it briefly there, around using that in the control room, but actually more broadly as we move beyond the control room in this conversation, about how you're using it to provide efficiency, so able to make summaries, draw in documentation and so forth. How far have fire rescue services come in terms of doing that? I know it's happening quite a lot in police, but are we seeing the use of perhaps agents or AI tools to provide that summary so that information can be fed more quickly, and how much do you trust it? So what does that look like in fire at the moment?
Certainly. So the Digital Data and Technology Committee is one of the newest within the National Fire Chiefs Council. It's probably been up and running for about 2 or 3 years. One of the first products we issued was the ethical use of artificial intelligence within the fire service, based a lot of knowledge and understanding on the Police Chiefs Council version as well, around keeping that human in the loop. So it is one of the core principles. And for absolute clarity, we won't be taking 999 calls using AI agents. That will always have a human in the loop. It might support some of the back office functions or other functions, but those 999 calls will always be handled by a human, making those really great decisions that they do on a daily basis. So once we've published that, we are now looking at where AI can be used across the sector. You're quite right. The police have some great use cases, particularly around analysing large quantities of video, whether that be facial recognition or for other purposes within the police environment. We haven't necessarily got that business use within fire and rescue services. So I think there's 2 levels to talk about here. First is how individual fire and rescue services are using AI within their organisations, where that's adding value, improving efficiency, speeding things up. And the second is the national use cases for AI in the sector and where it can really drive us forward. So if I first speak about where we're using it within our fire and rescue service, it's all the kind of normal functions you'd expect with AI. So very good for reviewing documents, even possibly suggesting documents or producing documents for us to take forward. All of the kind of office functionality around prioritising emails, etc., that's almost taken for granted now. Within my service, clearly, we always make sure that human in the loop is there. AI is great, but it can hallucinate at times and it can generate things that it doesn't necessarily know. So you do really need to make sure anything you're submitting or producing with your name on it, that you have checked. Nationally wise, it was only last week, actually, we generated 3 strategic business cases of where AI could demonstrably improve the sector in terms of efficiency and effectiveness. So British Telecom hosted a hot house for us through Tech UK, where we really got the right people from across the sector, from the tech market and from prevention, protection and response into a room to really look at where we can drive some of these business cases forward. So loosely speaking, there were 3. One was around fire prevention. We do things called home fire safety checks, where we go out to people targeted the most vulnerable in the community. Generally speaking, we either send a staff member or a fire engine with 4 or 5 people on it out to that to deliver that one home fire safety check. Some people may prefer not to have people in the home and would choose to video that, and AI can analyse that video really quickly, give some standardised advice immediately. And almost if you program it correctly, the AI would then identify if someone reaches such a high risk threshold, that would automatically trigger a human response to go and see them. Or if the household is generally safe, actually it can give that standardised advice. The second business case was around a very similar principle, but for low-level fire safety audits. So we're required to inspect non-domestic dwellings against the fire safety order or the regulatory reform fire safety order. And again, if they could film that video, film their premises in a really clear and structured way, which would be guided by on-screen instructions, we could really amplify the efficiency of our fire protection officers. It could give standardised advice to say, yes, your building is broadly compliant, or actually we've noticed some things, let's get a fire safety officer to come out to you. Fire safety officers are a really precious resource within the sector at the moment. It can take between 3 to 4 years to train them. We all have a significant number of non-domestic buildings, so their time is a real precious resource. So AI could step into that space and chew through or consume a lot of the low-level audits, allowing our fire safety officers to be targeted more on the most at-risk premises. And the third one's a little bit different, straying into the operational environment. Following the Grenfell Tower tragedy, a number of building changes, number of legislation changes have resulted, and particularly relevant to this one is the RPEPs legislation, so the Residential Personal Escape and Evacuation Plans, RPEPs. They're now being generated by responsible people within buildings and are either being held electronically or paper-based in secure boxes. Actually, I think that's solved an issue, but has probably caused a few more issues. So if we were to respond to an incident, it's another level of information that an incident commander needs to process and make decisions on. If we can get technology to support in the processing of that information, it really should transform what is a information-rich scene to actually a really operationally focused aid to incident commanders. So we looked at if you're holding the RPEEP's information electronically, could you have an AI source that interfaces with the RPEEP's information, the mobilising system or incident log, where calls are, where people have been told to stay put, and could AI suggest to the incident commander a evacuation strategy and telling them exactly where those high-risk people are and targeting those right resources as quickly as possible to really affect life-changing rescues or evacuations. So 3 really interesting use cases. Usefully, with the tech suppliers around the room, they were able to kind of suggest how technology could probably help in all 3 of those really, really quickly. So we've moved from strategic business cases now almost to technical examples of how that could be done. And that's all 3 of those are scalable to a national level rather than individual fire and rescue service. Clearly, we've got a few more conversations to have to make sure the integrations are right. A lot of testing before we look to roll those out into a live environment, but really quite exciting and really different use cases of where AI can drive the sector forward, providing we are guiding it in the way we want it to.
I'm quite excited by that list. I think that's really interesting. So prevention, obviously very much in my background and something I'm very interested in home fire safety visits, that to have video. So the video idea, both in the HFSV plus the audits under the fire safety order, would be to put a single officer into the home or the building, create the video for it then to be transferred into your systems to allow somebody from their desktop to do the assessment without having to go out, so they could do it more quickly, but also have the AI assisting with that analysis for consistency and so forth. But presumably within your walled garden, you wouldn't put that out into the World Wide Web. So that's really interesting use of it. The RPEEP stuff is interesting in terms of the sheer volume. So is the intention that every time one of those is completed, it is uploaded nationally so that you get a national view of what this looks like, or will it always be just local data?
So the aspiration is for this all to be at a national level rather than individual services having to set systems up. Ideally, and we are a little way away from this, but ideally there would be one central point. For argument's sake, let's say it's the NFCC website. So a responsible person, irrespective of what county you're in or where you are in the country, you would just upload your RPEEP information to one single repository. That way, the data becomes standardised in the way it's entered. A responsible person, irrespective of which county, they're just filling in the same form. That becomes important of how AI can then interpret that and present that to the incident commander. It also solves some data protection issues, not all, and I'm not going to pretend we've resolved all of the data protection issues yet. But actually, it can be held centrally with no one having access until an incident is triggered in the premises, and then that premise information is released because there is an emergency situation that could involve life-saving activity, which reduces the impact of data protection governance at that moment in time. As soon as the incident's resolved, then actually the data closes down and is protected again. So the aspiration is to have a national database. Again, we need to do a few proof of concepts to see if that's viable, and that the small issue of gaining some funding, hopefully from MHCLG or another body. But actually, if we can demonstrate the scalability of this and the life-saving actions of all of these pieces of work, then I think the business cases are really quite strong for significant investment.
You mentioned the government department there. So are you being encouraged by the department, both in terms of the officials, but also the policy and the ministers, to drive efficiencies as a result of this kind of investment? Will it be a sense of, we'll give you the money, but you've got to demonstrate that you are saving time and to be able to use that time doing other things you couldn't do as a result of being, weighed down by these things which could be done by a computer? So would that be the case? You'd have to demonstrate that there is value and you can save money.
I think so. I think community safety has to come into this as well. Clearly, the Grenfell Tower fire, an absolutely horrible event, a massive tragedy in itself. We, as a sector, are very keen to prevent replication, but the Ministry of Housing, MHCLG, are also keen to prevent that kind of incident again. So, yes, we would need to demonstrate efficiency and effectiveness, but actually I think we can really demonstrate the case for making our communities safer and our communities more resilient. That's an important thing for MHCLG. And in fairness, they are encouraging, whilst I haven't sat around the table with them to discuss funding for these 3 significant projects, the noise and the engagement levels from them around general improving community safety is positive.
That's good to hear. You also talked about resilience just there, which is quite helpful. I was thinking about how fire and rescue services are managing their risk and how they're using technology to assist with that. I was thinking about prediction. So we produce a lot of data. Fire and rescue services produce a lot of data, but also need to access lots of data from other people in order to create a kind of blended view of risk. When we think about heat in particular, given where we are in the summer, beginning of the summer with heat waves, how are you able to use technology to help more with predicting where you think events or incidents might happen, like wildfires, in order to be able to put your resources in the right place, think about planning to give the best response? How does that look in terms of your technology at the moment?
So again, I probably need to cover a bit of background before we go into individual specifics. So currently, there is no national body or national fire and rescue service resource in the way that there is the police digital service, which kind of provides a centralised position, a number of functions to police services. It's something that the NFCC would be keen to move to, but clearly that needs significant funding and infrastructure investment so that we could almost have those centralised models to be able to analyse risk across the country. That doesn't currently exist, and it's something I personally would be keen to look to explore. I think arguably even there's a role in that as we move towards the College of Fire. Could the College of Fire provide that centralised function? Quite possibly. So what we're left with currently is each fire and rescue service will have to analyse its own risk. It does that through a community risk management plan, or CRMP. We do that between 3 and 5 yearly, and that's looking at the risk within your own individual area. So that's the existing risk and what you already know, previous incidents, where your population currently is, and then you forecast what the risk profile may look like or evolve over the next 3 years. Where's your community going to grow? Do you have what large areas of wildlife, particularly relevant for wildfires, etc.? Do you have these wide open spaces? And you plan your resourcing against that risk. I think it would be fair to say each service will do that in a bespoke way to their individual area, which I think is quite right. If you take Leicestershire, for example, we are very, very different from London. Our profile looks very different, so we should look at that slightly differently. We would all use the National Fire Standard for community risk management plans to base that on, and that gives you I suppose, a common ground of what the risk you should be looking at and how you should analyse it. But each service currently does that itself, looking at the data, positioning its resources accordingly. I think there's scope where we could look to improve that at a national scale if we were to receive that investment.
You talked about the process then and the systems, but in terms of the data that you have now about wildfire in particular, so I'm interested in this because it's quite warm and there's a lot of it potentially going to happen. And thinking back to 2022, when we had the fires in London, where an entire row of houses was hit by wildfire, which should never have happened. It's a peculiar change and reflecting where we are. So I wonder, in terms of the tech today, is the fire service investing enough into technology to help with those risks and really think about the future? Or is it still stuck in the same cycle of doing the CRMPs and using the same things? Is there scope there to do the kind of stuff you were talking about with your BT hothouse, which is well named for this conversation today, to be able to do more in that space as well?
So I think even if we are stuck in the same cycle of CRMPs, every time you repeat a CRMP, you look at historical data and incident trends and incorporate that into that. So the fires that most of the country saw in 2022, not just London, I think there were 16 counties that declared major incidents that day, Leicestershire being one of those. So irrespective of if we're in the same CRMP cycle, I think that those trends are picked up, analysed and incorporated. I think it definitely is in Leicestershire, but it's the only county I can speak of specifically. But I would imagine all services are. But yes, I do think there are more sophisticated prediction models going to be available to the sector fairly soon. Again, internally, I only say that because I can speak with absolute confidence. We have someone trained to work with AI, and they are building a predicted model. And we've compared it. We've built the model in the last 5 years of data, but we've deliberately excluded the last 12 months so that we can almost get the model to predict what that 12 months looked like and then put the actual over it. And I have to say, we're not far away from having a model that can really tailor and predict where incidents may be based on our historic information, weather information, and that's the last piece of the puzzle. We're overlaying weather information now. to make sure that it is truly predictive. It will never be 100% correct, because as we said, whilst we've got humans at the wheel and involved in everything, human behaviour can be unpredictable, and our communities don't always conform to those infinitely predictable scenarios that we all hope for. There's always that element of the chaos theory somewhere in that. But actually, it's really exciting times. It's not finished yet. And I think there is some other stuff we could probably learn from the continent, particularly in wildfire identification and predictions. There are a number of tools out there which are able to identify wildfires particularly early and then target resources to it really, really quickly. So you almost overwhelm it with strength and weight of attack in an early stage, and it prevents the incident escalating or being dragged out. Again, that requires significant investment that individual services, I don't think, are equipped to do at the moment. And that's something we would need significant infrastructure funding from. So to answer your question briefly, yes, there's quite a lot of work, but we need to move forward that with a national purpose and a degree of funding.
I feel like you're building the business case for the College of Fire here, which is currently out for consultation. Do you think that there would be an element of it which would be very much all about the data, all about the national thinking to create these views which aren't 44 English fire services all chatting individually, actually bring it all together, having this national view and having the expertise in one place doing things once? Would that be the aspiration?
It certainly is my aspiration. I think it makes sense in an awful lot of cases, as we're talking about here with technology. Crikey, why would you want 44 fire and rescue services exploring it 44 times? Explore it once with the subject matter expert there, do all of the testing in an essential environment, and make that then available to fire and rescue services. Certainly for digital technology and cyber, it makes absolute sense in my view.
And in other spaces as well. So I'm interested to talk to you a bit about a different topic, which is around search and rescue. So I've been on a few visits recently where I've been to see search and rescue technology in services, one of which was a underwater sonar, which had been developed by Greater Manchester Fire Service, put together this device, and I saw it go into the lake, and it had sonar on it, and it was detecting where a body was. Well, it was a Ruth Lee mannequin, but it was under the water and you could see it, and instead of committing the firefighter to the water, it could then identify it so that they could then be rescued effectively. So it was just one example of technology in search and rescue, and I'm sure there are plenty more. I wonder, in terms of your work at the national level, what are you seeing in this space that you think could be shared with others? And is there enough investment thinking going into that part of the fire and rescue service world?
Crikey, we could probably spend a day or two just talking about the amount of operational technology that's available. Obviously, you've mentioned the sonar one. I'm aware of almost robotic drones that if someone's drowning or stuck in water, you can send the drone out to them for them to grab hold of and then come back through the water. So there's an immense amount of technology, of development, again, all targeted towards saving lives or reducing risk of exposure in putting firefighters into water to swim out to that casualty. Again, my view would be this is where the College of Fire really has some opportunity to take a central role in research and development. At the moment, individual services will look at what's available, where that fits their risk profile, and whether they can afford it. That's a real question for a number of fire and rescue services. Lancashire are especially good in this environment. They're leading the way with drones, with robots and other technology, but other services might not necessarily have that capacity to be able to do that. So again, the market at the moment is a really exciting place because there's lots of innovation and lots of driving forward. I just think we need that central place to really do research and development quite well, and arguably even set a procurement methodology or framework out so services can procure that in a really effective and efficient way rather than running 44 procurement activities. Couldn't we build a framework and just allow call-offs? Again, I think that's a great space for the College of Fire, and I think that levels the playing field a little bit. Like I say, some services are really good at it, and I look on with envy, not jealousy, because they're really able to allocate resources. Not everyone's in that position, and that feels like a great place where we could support those that aren't able to do it.
I wonder if it could work both ways, though. So you have the R&D happening at a national level in order to be efficient and to share that, but also the organic side of it. So in Manchester, the person that had developed this sonar, this device that went under the water and actually could grab the casualty as well, he was simply developing something because he had a passion for it. So you've got a kind of organic thing, but actually scaling it up to become regional, national is hard too. So do you see the college being able to do both of those things so that it's not just a very top-down thing, but actually allows the bottom to come up as well and somewhere meet in the middle?
I don't even think that's a nice to have. I think that's an essential function. Ultimately, the firefighters or the people at the receiving end of the technology know what they need it to do, know what the problems are, and probably have got some really good ideas and solutions how to fix it in a practical way. It's all very well me sitting in my office thinking about a problem and thinking how I'd solve it. I'm a long way from a fire engine now. I probably wouldn't know what the actual problem is. So yes, it needs to build a way of kind of taking those innovations, ideas and suggestions, filtering out some of the ones that are probably left field and solving a problem that doesn't exist. There's a harsh reality in looking at, is it actually a problem? But there are a number of problems out there that the best way of solving it would be with the people involved. And I'd like to think most services now with their project methodology always have users involved in project boards and devising the solutions. I'd like to think that would naturally happen at College of Fire in that central function.
Callum, are you seeing any great technology innovations in fire stations to assist with decontamination of fire kit?
Yes, certainly. So again, it's another area of a centralised problem where we are seeing some really good innovations across the board. Clearly, it's a significant challenge to get people safely back from incidents, decontaminate the kit, make sure we don't spread unintended contamination throughout the stations. And clearly, technology's got a role to play in that. I think, in fairness, there's some transactional stuff done around bagging up of kit, keeping cabs clean. And the technology is kind of really looking at the station focus around establishing dirty, intermediate and clean areas of the station. And I am aware of some partners looking at air sampling of the station. So at the moment, those are quite static, those zonings, i.e. a room is identified as red, amber or green. But actually, shouldn't that evolve depending on where the particles are or what contamination levels are present? And again, it's an emerging technology, but people are looking at air sampling and various different pieces of technology that can really aid people in understanding their environment, how they contribute that, and how they can minimise the impact on them and their colleagues. So, yeah, nothing fully set yet, but some really exciting innovation happening, again, in partnership with the tech industry rather than the Fire and Rescue Service trying to solve its problems by itself.
Are you doing that in conversation with Tech UK, who you mentioned earlier, in terms of your hothouse? Are they the ones that are helping you connect?
Not currently. I think each service will individually be looking at this at the moment. There is a health and safety executive series of inspections coming around looking at contaminants. I personally welcome that, as I think it's a really important subject to make sure we're complying with. But we're also hopeful that will produce like a national overview of where good innovation's going on, what good looks like, and how that can then be consistently spread out across all of the UK fire and rescue services. So again, it's an evolving picture, but one that I think we can get some really good best practice out of and share that across the country.
Is that scaling up again, isn't it? So you're working out a local level and able to then see how you can take that to a national level so that everybody benefits. You're not doing it 44 times again, which is good to hear. So air sampling, interesting stuff. And of course, we'll produce lots and lots of data, which you'll be able to manage and layer with everything else in terms of understanding risk. And it just shows how important all this data is. But you are producing so much of it. Your systems need to be safe and secure to be able to handle it and keep it all safe. So I just want to ask you briefly about cyber resilience. So we've got all these fire services having to manage all their technology on premises, but also in the cloud. Are you seeing lots of good work happening in the cyber space to make sure that you're all safe? Because when we see cyber attacks happen, they take down organizations for a long time. In fire services, we don't want to see that. So what kind of work are you seeing in that space?
Yeah, so actually we've done an awful lot of work towards cyber, and it's probably consumed most of certainly the Digital Technology and Cyber Board time for the past year or so. So really pleased to say through a lot of hard work and diligence of a relatively small team, we've helped the National Fire Standards Board in producing the Digital and Cyber Standard. That sets a really nice baseline for services to aspire to around reaching a certain level of cyber defence. And then obviously each fire and rescue service is working through their individual infrastructures with legacy software, legacy hardware, and kind of going through that process of reaching that Cyber Essentials Plus standard. Sadly, cyber is here to stay, cyber incidents, whether they be malicious actors or actual attacks, or whether they be infrastructure failures or software patch failures or whatever, they're likely to be here to stay. And it's important that services, A, are able to defend their position, maintain that business continuity, to be able to continue to deliver that service, have fallback mechanisms in place. But ideally, we really want to kind of see off or defend the position and make sure the infrastructure is fit for purpose. Again, that's easier said than done in a lot of cases, as computers are rolled out across the sector since probably the late 80s, early 90s. Everyone's landscape looks a little bit different, but that level of introducing a cyber assessment framework supported by a number of government organisations kind of really to scrutinise and help, National Cyber Security Centre being probably the main partner and stakeholder in that. So again, we've established that good base level. A number of services are surpassing that, and most other services are at it, with a few coming close to reaching that level now. So it's a good centrally driven programme involving all the right partners, establishing that base level, but also making sure you've got that business continuity in the event of a cyber attack or a cyber failure. And we have seen, you're quite right to identify, whether it be industry, whether it be government departments, fire and rescue services, the likelihood is at some point or other we will have either an attack or some sort of failure. So we need to be ready for it.
Are you having those conversations at senior management level? So when you, as a chief, get together with your senior leadership team, is cyber on the table, or is it kind of over there in the IT department? How significant is it in those kind of leadership conversations?
I would say it's very significant now. And I would imagine if you look at any organisation, not just fire and rescue services, on their organisational risk register, cyber will probably be one of the highest scoring risks posed to an organisation at the moment. So if it's not happening at strategic level, it really should be happening. Certainly we're seeing within the fire sector now, people are running incident exercises around cyber attacks, not just operational response or wide area flooding, whatever it may be. And there's a number of supporting materials out there, again, provided by National Fire Chiefs Council to almost have an exercise in a box around cyber attacks and what you can do, incorporating your ICT team in some of those exercises. We haven't traditionally done that within the fire service. Now it's becoming more and more commonplace. We'll never be completely prepared simply because the cyber environment is evolving. The people behind cyber attacks are evolving, finding new ways, new technology. And I think it is always going to be that constant cat and mouse game as technology improves, both in defending cyber and then how people might exploit any vulnerabilities or weaknesses. So yes, I think fire and rescue services are very well prepared, but we're always going to have to be on the front foot with that. And very similar to what we talked about earlier with keeping people in the loop with AI, people are a vulnerability when it comes to cyber attack. People are probably the element that could be targeted. I myself was subject to a spear phishing attack within the organisation only a month or so ago, where people were trying to use my name and image to extract information from people. Thankfully, it didn't go anywhere because the person receiving the message was on the ball and reported it accordingly. But it just goes to show, even in this cyber and connected world, people are probably going to be the vulnerability that will remain constant.
You are absolutely right. The vulnerability of individuals and organisations, through no fault of their own, who end up causing all sorts of issues for organisations. So it's good to highlight that, and interesting to hear about your example there. We are now coming to time. We have been speaking for a long time, and it's been fascinating to go through all the aspects of technology in fire and rescue services. I think for people listening, they might not necessarily have thought about technology in all these different places and where it permeates so much of what you do in terms of your business. And also, helpfully, because I'm thinking about the Emergency Tech Show, which was coming up in September, and how we're going to have some great content, you have covered off all of the subjects that we want to cover in terms of AI, cyber, public contact, resilience. These are all big topics for other organisations thinking about. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much, Callum, for spending time with me and taking us through the world of technology through a fire service lens, and just demonstrating how extensive it is and how important technology is to delivering fire services. So thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for your time.
I love his passion for the control room, and I'm grateful to him for sharing his early career story with me. It's good to start by getting into the detail of control room technology and understand it through a human behaviour lens. Probably one of the most mentally fatiguing environments he has worked in, he tells me. Callum talks about ethics as a foundation for technology innovation when it comes to AI, and this echoes what Corinne Russell talked to me about from a police perspective in the last episode of the pod. Although the use case for fire is different to police, as becomes clear from talking to Callum. The national work on AI is intriguing, and the 3 use cases he shares with me offer exciting opportunities for improvement and efficiency. I like the use of the term hothouse to provide a safe environment to innovate, future gaze, and imagine what could happen if the cash is there. And that is often the problem with innovation. Where does the money come from? For fire, all eyes are on the College of Fire as the new centre for fire, in England at least. Do check out the government's consultation on what this will look like. It seems to me that tech is fundamental to its core mission and to its success. My thanks to Callum for talking to me. That's it from me for now. Episodes of this series drop every Tuesday. This series is brought to you in partnership with the Emergency Tech Show and the Police Digital Service. The show takes place on the 16th and 17th of September at the NEC in Birmingham. Registration is now open and the link is in the show notes. Be sure to share, like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast for Emergency Services Times.